All right, welcome back to the deep dive. For years, the story of football development in India, and specifically the rise of the Indian Super League, has been all about potential.
So much potential. The population, the passion, the ambition, you hear it all the time.
Exactly. But the one question that never seems to go away is, well, is it actually built to last? Is the ISL structurally and financially sustainable?
That's the billion-dollar question, isn't it? Because growth is a headline, but sustainability,
Mm,
that's a balance sheet. And to get past those headlines, today we've armed ourselves with a really intensive quantitative study.
this is a Footylytics ISL sustainability analysis.
Right, and this isn't, a bunch of opinions or hot takes from pundits. This is all about data, hard metrics, global comparisons.
So our mission today is to cut right through that noise and dive straight into the operational core of the ISL. We're going to unpack three key indices that really define the league's DNA.
The first is the Promotion Relegation Index, which is all about competitive pressure.
Then there's the Developer Index, which tells us about the league's financial model.
And finally, the Broadcast Dependency Index, which really highlights where the market is vulnerable.
The value here, for you listening, is clarity. These metrics let us categorize the ISL in the global football ecosystem almost instantly.
We can define where it stands, whether it's operating as a buyer or a developer league, or if it's in a closed or an open competitive structure.
And by doing that, we can define the inherent risk and reward that investors are looking at.
We're basically turning a strategic vision into something measurable, into actual targets.
That's the key. We're looking at the current situation of the Indian Super League purely through this analysis, and then we're going to focus on what changes the data says are needed for the league to actually hit its long-term goals.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We should probably start at the very foundation, right? The competitive structure.
The bedrock of any league.
And that's measured by this Promotion Relegation Index, or PR Index. This isn't just about making things exciting for the fans. No, not at all. It's about competitive jeopardy. It tells you how much it matters for a club to perform and, how connected that top tier is to the rest of the football pyramid in India.
So what does the data say? Where is the ISL right now?
Right now, the source data puts the ISL's PR Index at 8.33%.
8.33%.
Okay.
To most people, that's just a number. But in this analysis, that's a specific category marker, isn't it?
It is. It's categorized as transitional.
Which makes a lot of sense, historically speaking. The league started out completely closed, didn't it? Sort of mimicking Major League Soccer in the U.S.
Exactly, a pure franchise model. And now they've started taking these gradual steps toward opening things up.
But what does 8.33% actually mean in terms of pressure on the clubs?
Well, you have to look at the extremes to get it. A PR index of 0% is a pure closed system.
No relegation, no promotion. Your franchise spot is guaranteed.
Correct. That's the old ISL model.
Yeah.
Then you have leagues like the English Premier League or La Liga, where you have multiple teams going down from a big top division. Their index is much, much higher.
So where does 8.33% fit in?
The ISL's 8.33% puts it squarely in the bracket defined as 8% to 11%.
Which the analysis calls the Transitional State low-pressure bracket.
Precisely. So the main takeaway for you, the listener, is that the ISL right now has a very limited connection to the lower tiers.
And therefore, very low competitive jeopardy.
Very low. It's a structural trade-off you often see in new leagues. You minimize the risk for investors to get them in the door, but you also minimize the competitive reason to excel.
Now, I have to push back on that a little, because you look at successful leagues, MLS being the prime example, that work perfectly well with a closed 0% PR system.
That's a critical point.
Right. I mean, if your goal in a market like India is to attract stable, deep-pocketed owners who need a guarantee that one bad season won't just wipe out their investment, isn't this 8.33% actually a good thing for survival right now? Why is the data pushing for more?
It's a great question, and it's something the analysis has to address. While low risk attracts stable capital, it often discourages smart capital and long-term domestic investment.
What do you mean by that?
Well, think about it. If there's no real threat of relegation, what's the incentive for an owner to invest in a costly youth academy that might take 5 or 6 years to produce a first-team player?
It's easier to just go out and buy a foreign player in the transfer window for a short-term fix.
Exactly. The low pressure creates a culture of short-term thinking. And for a league like the ISL, which wants global relevance and a stronger national team, you need that competitive pressure to force clubs to think long-term, to build those domestic talent pipelines.
So the low pressure is actually undermining the structural integrity they need to get to the next level of development.
It's holding them back.
And this analysis doesn't just point out the problem, it gives them a target. The source explicitly says the ISL's required promotion relegation index is 11.32%.
That number, 11.32%, is the bridge. It's the bridge from this transitional state to, let's call it, maturity.
And that pushes the ISL into the next competitive tier, right? The one defined as 11% to 15%.
The moderate pressure, high stakes bracket. And that increase, which is only about 3 percentage points on paper, it represents a massive philosophical shift for the league.
So what does hitting 11.32% actually look like on the ground? What kind of structural changes are we talking about for the Indian football pyramid?
It means you need an established, open pyramid structure, no more ambiguity. The analysis suggests that to get to that moderate pressure level, to hit that 11.32% index, you need a system where the risks are real and consistent.
So in a normal league of, say, 18 or 20 teams,
You'd be talking about 2 or 3 teams being relegated every single season. A full functional connection between the top tier and the one below it.
so you're moving from a transitional experiment to a proper open league. And that's huge, because adding that moderate jeopardy, it must completely change how owners behave.
It changes everything. In a low-pressure environment like they have now, losing a match is disappointing. In a moderate-pressure environment, losing a match can mean relegation. And that means a massive loss of income, sponsorship value, prestige, everything.
That financial consequence forces them to be much more strategic.
Acutely strategic. They have to focus on performance, on player quality, not just on maintaining their franchise status.
So the jump from 8.33% to 11.32% is really the data's mandate for building competitive integrity.
It becomes a meritocracy. And that is what drives market value in the long run. You look at leagues that get stuck in that transitional phase, they often just plateau because there's no threat, so there's no urgency to innovate in coaching, scouting, talent development.
So for the ISL to really tap into its massive potential market, that 11.32% target is non-negotiable.
It signals to the whole global football community that they're serious about competitive standards.
And that PR structure, that competitive foundation, sets the stage perfectly for the next metric, which is all about the money. I mean, a league with low competitive risk is structurally less likely to generate revenue from its main asset, the players.
That's the perfect transition.
So let's go from structure to finance. How does this low-pressure environment directly impact the financial engine of the ISL clubs?
This is where it gets really interesting.
Yes, the financial DNA of the league, using the developer index. This is the one metric that tells us if the league is a self-sustaining business or just, a perpetual cash burn.
Fundamentally, does the ISL make money by selling talent, or is it always buying it?
And this is where we separate the sustainable from the subsidized.
Right. The analysis gives us 2 clear poles of global football finance. If your developer index has a positive value, you're what's called a developer league.
And this is the ideal model for long-term health. The source specifically says this is a key target for India.
Absolutely. Developer leagues are incredibly sustainable because their main profit comes from selling players, usually into Europe's Big 5 leagues. Their whole business model is based on producing a surplus of talent.
You think of leagues like Liga Portugal, or the Brazil Around in Brazil, or the Dutch Eredivisie.
Exactly. They are talent factories. Their success is rooted in their academies. They are net exporters of talent.
And the alternative, which is often the more glamorous one, is the buyer league.
The alternative is the negative value model, the buyer league. These are the leagues that consistently run a huge negative net transfer balance. They spend way more on buying players than they ever make from selling them.
Now, this can be sustainable, but only under very specific conditions.
Extreme conditions, really. The Premier League is a buyer league, but it sustains this because its total league revenue is just colossal. It can easily cover that negative transfer balance.
Or the Saudi Pro League, which is sustained by massive state subsidy.
Right. So if you're a buyer league, but you don't have one of those 2 things, either massive commercial revenue or a state backer, you are, by definition, structurally unstable. You're completely reliant on owner goodwill.
Which brings us to the ISL, And the data here is pretty stark. The ISL's KPI Developer Index is minus 0.01.
Minus 0.01. It's technically, unequivocally, a negative value.
So the ISL is currently operating as a buyer league.
It is. And while minus 0.01 might seem tiny, it means that, in total, the league is a net spender. It's not generating enough money from its core football asset player trading to even cover that small deficit.
Which means the owners have to absorb it. It confirms the whole structure is reliant on external cash.
And this connects directly back to the PR index we were just talking about.
Of course, if you're not facing the pressure of relegation.
You're much less incentivized to go through the years of patience and cost it takes to develop a youth player you can sell for 5 million euros. When you can just spend 2 million on a quick fix from abroad.
It's a behavioral loop.
Yeah.
Low competitive pressure leads to short-term spending.
Which makes you a buyer league. The analysis really captures that critical link.
Let's look at the visual evidence in the source. There's a chart, Broadcast Dependency versus 10-year net transfer balance, and it visually groups the ISL with a few other leagues.
It does. It puts the ISL, which is labeled IND, in a specific category right alongside MLS from the USA and Liga MX from Mexico.
And what is that category called?
It's explicitly labeled a high-risk buyer model.
High risk. Why high risk?
Because they have that negative net transfer balance, they're sitting very low on the chart, but it's combined with a moderate broadcast dependency, which we'll get into next. So unlike the Premier League, which is also a buyer, but has overwhelming revenue to compensate, the ISL is buying players despite having a pretty low overall commercial footprint.
So the risk is that the league's operational revenue can't offset the spending.
Exactly. And the successful developer leagues, like Portugal and Brazil, are in the complete opposite quadrant on that chart. They have strongly positive net transfer balances, they're making money from selling players, and that's what fuels their operations.
So if the ISL wants to shift that negative 0.01 index into positive territory to become a sustainable developer, what does that take? It sounds like a massive cultural shift.
It's a cultural and a regulatory overhaul. It's not just about building better pitches. It means you have to prioritize youth development, professionalize your scouting networks, and this is a big one, you have to manage your foreign player quotas.
How does the foreign player policy directly impact that developer index?
Well, it's simple. If a club can easily fill its squad with, higher quality but more expensive foreign players, it reduces the pressure on local talent to develop quickly.
And it reduces the club's incentive to invest in those long-term domestic youth structures.
Exactly. To generate a positive net transfer balance, your Indian players have to be good enough to not just start for ISL teams, but eventually to move to other leagues that will pay a transfer fee for them. That's how you generate revenue.
So if the rules make it easier to buy foreign talent than to nurture domestic talent,
that NECA 0.01 index will stay negative, and that guarantees your dependence on the owners.
So moving from a high-risk buyer to a developer league requires strategic policy shifts that basically force clubs to see their academies as profit centers, not just, a box-ticking exercise.
That's it. It changes the entire business philosophy. For an ISL owner right now, the primary goal is often prestige and just staying afloat. To become a developer league, the goal has to become talent realization. We're talking about better player registration, maybe easing rules on Indian players moving abroad to help them develop, and real accreditation systems for academies.
Until that index turns positive, the whole financial structure of the ISL relies not on footballing success, but on the generosity of a handful of people.
That's the bottom line. It's a powerful thing to realize that sustainability in football is often less about how much you spend and much more about how much asset value you create through your players.
Okay, so we've established the structural challenge, that low competitive pressure, and the financial philosophy challenge being a high-risk buyer. Now we need to look at where the ISL's money actually comes from right now.
Right, and that leads us to the critical measure of financial vulnerability. Broadcast dependency.
Because any league that relies too heavily on a single revenue stream is a fragile league.
And the data shows the ISL's broadcast dependency index is 40.0%.
40%. That's substantial. It means 4 out of every 10 rupees in revenue is coming from broadcasting rights. Now, the analysis gives a general acceptable range of 15% to 70%. So on the surface, 40% seems kind of safe.
It seems safe, but context is everything here. And this is where we really have to challenge that assumption that 40% is safe. We have to compare it globally.
Okay.
So you look at massive commercial engines like the Premier League, they are highly dependent, sitting around 70%. The Saudi Pro League is high too, at about 60%. But their overall revenue pie is enormous.
I see where you're going with this, but let me challenge it another way. If the ISL wants to be a major global league, isn't 40% maybe too low? I mean, why would the analysis suggest reducing reliance on broadcasting when the biggest leagues in the world rely on it so heavily?
Because the absolute value of that broadcast stream is so low, it means the dependency is highly concentrated risk. Look at the leagues the ISL should want to copy in terms of sustainability, the efficient developer leagues.
Like the Bundesliga or Liga Portugal?
Exactly. The Bundesliga, known for its incredible fan culture and matchday revenue, has a dependency around 24%. Liga Portugal is at 28%. They intentionally diversify their revenue so they're not destroyed if one broadcast deal goes south.
So for the ISL, 40% dependency on a low total revenue is the definition of vulnerability.
And this brings us to the broadcast dependency versus average revenue per game chart, which just lays this risk bare.
This is the most glaring number in the whole analysis for me.
It really is. The ISL's average revenue per game is only 0.0016 billion.
Let's just pause on that number. 10 thousandths of a billion euros per game. That is incredibly low.
It's tiny.
To put that in perspective for you listening, the Premier League generates 0.00093 billion per game. That's nearly 6 times the ISL's output. La Liga is at 0.00074 billion.
The gap is massive. So the ISL is relying 40% on a revenue stream that is derived from this tiny commercial base. If a Premier League broadcast deal drops by 10%, it's a problem. But they have huge commercial value, from tickets, merch, sponsorships, to cushion that blow.
But if the ISL's deal drops by 10%,
the league faces an immediate and severe financial crisis because the overall pot of money is just so small.
so the risk isn't the percentage itself, it's the weakness of the denominator. If the ISL wants that 40% to be sustainable, the average revenue per game has to grow dramatically.
That is the mandate. If you can't reduce the dependency percentage, you have to increase the total value of each match.
And the chart puts the ISL near the A-League in Australia and Liga MX in Mexico, which are useful comparisons.
They are. They face similar challenges with market saturation and competing with other sports. But the ISL's position shows it needs really aggressive commercial strategies that go way beyond just the TV deal.
So how does the analysis suggest they break this cycle of high dependency on low value?
The main lever it identifies is volume, simple volume.
The number of games played.
Right. The current ISL KPI for matches per team is incredibly low, only 22.
22.
And the analysis sets a strategic goal of 38 matches per team.
38. That is a staggering operational deficit, a shortfall of over 42% in their scheduled games. How can a professional league that wants to be world-class be missing almost half its competitive inventory?
It's a holdover from the league's early days when it was more of a short, high-impact tournament. But commercial maturity, that requires a full calendar. If the ISL wants to increase its revenue per game from that 1.00016 billion, one of the simplest ways is to just have more games.
More games to sell tickets for, to advertise against, to fulfill sponsorship contracts with.
Exactly. More product to sell.
But let's talk about the operational challenge of going from 22 matches to 38. This is not a simple scheduling fix. This means basically doubling the length of the competitive season.
It's a huge shift.
It impacts player welfare, training, stadium availability, and, maybe most importantly, the willingness of owners to fund a much longer operational window.
The operational lift is immense. The current structure allows for a compressed season, which keeps costs and travel down for the owners. Expanding to 38 matches forces them to become year-round football businesses.
They need better training facilities, larger squads to handle rotation and fatigue.
And they have to deal with stadium logistics, often sharing with cricket or other events for a much longer period. This expansion in match volume is a direct challenge to that early cost-minimizing culture of the league.
So increasing the match volume is the key operational lever to both dilute that 40% broadcast dependency and increase the league's total commercial footprint.
That's it. You solve the problem of low average revenue by simply giving yourself more inventory to monetize.
The pathway to less financial risk isn't necessarily a better broadcast deal, but a longer season.
Exactly. That 42% deficit is the most tangible operational mandate the ISL is facing. If they solve this volume problem, that 40% dependency suddenly becomes a lot less scary because the total pool of revenue it represents will be substantially larger.
Okay, so what does this all mean? We have these three critical interwoven metrics that define where the ISL is today. This analysis gives us a really clear, cohesive picture of the problems.
And it shows that the solutions have to be addressed together at the same time.
Right. So let's just summarize the current snapshot before we connect all the solutions.
Let's do it. So first, in terms of structure and competitive pressure, the ISL is in a transitional state at 8.33 per C PR index.
Low jeopardy.
Very low. Second, for its sustainability model, it is a high-risk buyer with that negative developer index of negative 0.01.
So it's reliant on subsidies.
Third, regarding financial health, it has a high broadcast dependency, 40%, but it's resting on an extremely low commercial output.
That 0.00016 billion per game.
And finally, activity and scale. A massive deficit there. Only 22 matches per team against a goal of 38. That's a 42% shortfall.
So let's talk about the interdependence. If the ISL only solves one of these problems, why does the whole thing still fail?
Yeah.
For example, let's say they do it. They dramatically increase the number of matches to 38, solving the volume issue. But they keep the PR index at 8.33% and the developer index at narrow 0.01. What happens?
Well, you've addressed the financial fragility, but you haven't fixed the financial philosophy.
Okay.
So if they play 38 matches, but there's still no threat of relegation, the owners still don't have that competitive pressure to invest in long-term efficiency. They might just spend more on short-term fixes to fill that longer calendar.
And since there's still a buyer league,
The increased match revenue just gets eaten up by the increased operational costs of a longer season. You haven't created any new sustainable revenue from selling players. It just becomes a bigger, more expensive buyer league, still fundamentally reliant on cash injections from owners.
okay, so flip it. What if they implement the required 11.32% PR index tomorrow? They bring in relegation, but they fail to increase the match volume from 22.
That creates what I'd call competitive chaos without commercial stability.
Right.
You've introduced moderate pressure, which forces clubs to spend smarter and pushes them toward becoming developers. But if they're only playing 22 matches, the average revenue per game is still that tiny 0.00016 billion.
So the financial consequence of relegation is massive.
It's massive because there isn't enough commercial inventory, not enough matches, not enough sponsorship exposure to absorb the increased risk of an open system. You'd be asking owners to take on these high stakes without giving them the commercial runway to mitigate that risk.
You'd probably scare off stable owners entirely.
You absolutely would.
So the analysis is basically providing three clear, non-negotiable mandates for change. And they have to be done together for the ISL to actually achieve its goals of sustainability.
Absolutely. The necessary changes are comprehensive. First, you have to increase the competitive jeopardy.
The structural mandate.
Yeah.
Move the PR index from 8.33% to the required 11.32%.
That means real promotion and relegation, an open pyramid, the moderate pressure needed to drive efficiency.
Okay, what's number two?
Number two is to shift the revenue philosophy. This is the strategic mandate. The ISL has to move from being a cash-dependent buyer to a player-selling developer.
So policy changes on foreign players, on youth academies.
Exactly. Everything needed to push that developer index into positive territory, to copy the model of leagues like Portugal and Brazil.
And the third piece?
Expand the match schedule. This is the operational mandate. The league must address that 42% deficit by increasing matches from 22 toward that goal of 38.
And that's the key lever to increase commercial exposure and dilute the reliance on broadcast money.
It's what makes the financial structure robust enough to handle the increased competitive risk from the other changes.
So the analysis gives a clear, data-driven mandate for the ISL. Move your structure, shift your philosophy, and dramatically expand your activity. It shows the path to sustainability isn't one silver bullet, but three coordinated reforms, all guided by these specific measurable targets. You know, when we pull all these metrics together, the most striking thing for me is that categorization as a high-risk buyer, that AGAS 0.01 developer index. It just perfectly highlights a league that's caught between its ambition to be this world-class producer of talent and its current reality as a consumer of external cash.
It really is the critical juncture for Indian football, and these quantitative metrics, the pressure index, the buyer-developer status, the dependency, that massive deficit in match volume, they're so valuable because they force a strategic conversation based on numbers, not just on potential.
It's a precise blueprint.
It is. It provides a blueprint for achieving self-sufficiency in a really complex and developing market like India.
It provides the roadmap, but it also really highlights the huge challenges facing the current club owners who, let's be honest, invested under a very different low-risk franchise model.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll leave you with a final provocative thought to consider. When you think about the ISL's current low commercial value, that 0.00016 billion per game, which structural change presents the greater immediate challenge for the current franchises? Is it increasing the number of matches from 22 to 38, or is it adopting the required 11.32% PR index to bring in relegation?
The change in volume, or the change in competitive risk. One demands a massive investment in infrastructure and staff, and the other threatens the core stability of their initial investment. That is the fundamental strategic tension facing the ISL's leadership today.
We'll leave you to chew on that. Thanks for joining us for the deep dive.